Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville government, politics, education, business, really whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which covers all of the above, and you can find at CompassKnox.com. Joined, as always, by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing, Scott?
I am doing well whenever I'm inside when the air conditioning's on right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's warm this weekend. I hope everybody's managing to keep yourself adequately hydrated and shaded. I actually moderated a candidate forum for some state legislative offices last night. This was Thursday night at Fourth Presbyterian Church, and we had a pretty good turnout, and all the candidates were there, and that was great. But because of, I'm not sure exactly what happened organizationally when we got there, the air conditioning was not on, and we had a warm evening, let me tell you. Fortunately, the rhetoric stayed cool. Nobody got overheated, but except in the physical sense. Anyway, we have several things to talk about this week. Knox County Schools received some relatively good news from the State Department of Education about their much scrutinized reading scores for third and fourth graders. A couple of developments, proposed developments in South Knox County getting some scrutiny, some opposition from locals, and a look from the Planning Commission. We will talk about the School Board District 3 race, which is pretty interesting, both for the candidates in it and its potential impact on the makeup of the board. The city's African American Task Force did something, African American Equity Restoration Task Force, I should say, to give it its full name. It's not just an African American task force. It took an interesting, if smallish, step this week that we will talk about. And to start off, we're going to catch up on something that happened about a week ago on Friday, June 7th. There was a very interesting hearing before the Knox County Election Commission, which for various logistical reasons was held at 5:30 p.m. on a Friday, and actually had a pretty decent turnout of people who came down to it, although speaking for myself, I would really strongly discourage any of our local bodies or agencies from holding meetings that I might have to go to at 5:30 p.m. on a Friday, if it's at all avoidable in the future. So what this was, we talked about this a few weeks ago, there was a challenge filed to the nominating petition of a candidate for the 9th District County Commission seat. The 9th District County Commission seat represents essentially South Knoxville and South Knox County. And it is an interesting race this year. There's no incumbent running because the incumbent county commissioner, Carson Daly, is term limited. There is a Republican candidate, Andy Fox, a Democratic candidate, Matthew Park, and an independent candidate, Stacey Bryan Smith. And it is Stacey Bryan Smith who drew the attention and a challenge from some local residents who are connected to the campaign of Andy Fox, the Republican candidate. And Smith is somebody who previously had identified as a Republican, initially actually picked up a petition to run as a Republican and also a petition to run as an independent, and ultimately turned in the one to run as an independent, saying that he feels sort of alienated from both major political parties right now, and he wants to run and be an independent voice for the district, for the 9th District that he and his family have lived in for a long time and that they're pretty well established in. I asked him which parts of South Knoxville, South Knox County, his family comes from, and he's got family all over, from Vestal to Bonnie Kate. It's a big family, and they are pretty well known in the area, and that may be why he attracted the attention of some of Fox's supporters, out of concern that he could potentially draw voters away from Fox who might otherwise vote for the Republican, and that could be bad for Fox, either because Smith gets so many votes that he potentially wins, but I think the thing they're probably more worried about is that he pulls away enough potential Republican voters that it creates more of an opening for Park, the Democrat. So what happened was Martin Ammons, who's the treasurer of the County Republican Party and has been a supporter of Fox's, he was one of the people who signed Fox's nominating petition, he filed a challenge to Smith's nominating petition, saying that about 18 of the 27 names on the petition that had already been validated and certified by the Election Commission, he said, despite them being validated by the Election Commission, actually there were problems with them. And this mostly had to do with saying that he pulled old voting records for the people whose names are on the petition and said that their signatures didn't match and or their addresses didn't match what were on the county voting rolls. Now, the Election Commission staff had already looked at all of that and had still validated them. And Smith, when this challenge was first filed, kind of laughed it off, because he said that he not only personally knows all 18 of those people who were challenged, and he knows where they live and who they are, but that he's actually related to about half of them. It included his wife and his father-in-law and uncles and his brother, just like, again, we talked about him having this big family in South Knoxville. A lot of them signed his petition. Obviously, he knows who they are. And those were a lot of the people that Ammons was alleging were not, either had not legitimately signed it or, were not legitimate voters in the district and so forth. And just to be clear, in order to qualify for the ballot, you have to have 25 signatures from active registered voters in whatever district you are running in. And so in this case, the 9th District. And what this produced was something I've never seen before. It was a hearing, a sort of quasi-judicial proceeding where the 5 election commissioners, which is 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats, kind of sat as judges, and they heard testimony from Smith and from Martin Ammons, who filed this challenge. And Smith also brought some, not all, but some of the people whose signatures had been challenged came and also verified that, yes, they were the people on the petition. And basically, Smith's whole argument was that this was just a political game, and that Fox's supporters were just kind of trying to find any way they could to keep him off the ballot because they are afraid of what him being on the ballot could potentially mean for their candidate. Ammons said, absolutely not. This didn't have anything at all to do with partisan politics, he said. Just not a thing to do with partisan politics. This is all about the integrity of our elections. That was what he said. And so the Election Commission heard from both of them, and then also heard from Chris Davis, the election administrator, who kind of ran through. Chris Davis did say that on further review, his staff actually found that one of those 18 was invalid. It's a complicated story where there were 2 people with the same name who lived on the same street. One of them is a registered voter. The other one had been a registered voter, but had been purged from the rolls for inactivity, which is, by the way, something that happens to you. It's worth keeping track of. If you think you're a registered voter, but you haven't voted in several years in election cycles, you can get purged from the rolls. And when you show up to vote, you won't be able to. So it's always good to keep your voter registration active. And so Davis said that, yes, one of these people actually, it's not that she wasn't a real person or that she hadn't been a registered voter or that she didn't live in the 9th District, but that she had actually been purged for inactivity. So one of those was denied. But the election commissioners, after listening to all this and looking at it, they went ahead and validated all the rest of them and said that basically Ammons just hadn't presented any evidence at all beyond his own just kind of looking through these records and saying these things don't seem to match. And so that was the end of that. But I think its consequences are potentially interesting because Smith was extremely unhappy about this entire situation. He said that Ammons was basically calling him a liar, saying he was trying to cheat or that he, implying that he had forged signatures or something. And, he said, I could have gotten 200 signatures if I wanted to. And what he said was he had initially been planning to not really run much of a campaign, to just kind of stay low key, and the people who knew him would vote for him, but he wasn't intending to put a lot of energy into it. But he said now he is going to. He's going to show up places. He said any place Andy Fox shows up, he's going to be there too. He's going to be talking to people. He made very clear that of the other two candidates in the race, Fox and Park, Fox was the one he was mad at. He made a joke about a fox in the hen house in the 9th District, whereas he said Matthew Park had been nothing but a gentleman to him. And, he didn't go so far as to, say that people should vote for Matthew Park, of course. He's encouraging people to vote for him. But, Scott, to the extent that this was an effort by Fox supporters to try to kind of clear the way for Fox a little bit, which is really the only logical explanation for why anybody was even bothering to do this, it looks like it could backfire on them.
Yeah, it really drew a lot of attention to Smith's candidacy. That it's generally speaking, it's very difficult for an independent candidate to get a lot of traction, and I think that. As you said, he's got a big family, he's well known, but, he also wasn't really campaigning that hard or anything else. And then now he's galvanized, his family's galvanized. They're all, supercharged and ready to go. And, so I think, if that holds true through the summer, to August 1st, then yeah, I think you could say it backfired. Now, whether it truly affects the outcome is a different story. It may be that Fox is Republican, the district's Republican. It may be that Fox still wins, but the margins might be a lot narrower than they otherwise would have been.
Yeah, especially because the district was already to some degree in play. As you say, it's been traditionally Republican, has been represented by Republicans on county commission. But the most recent election that we have to look at in that district was the school board race 2 years ago, which Republican incumbent Christy Christie did win, but not by a huge amount. That race was closer than most people, including Christie, expected it to be. And that was with an incumbent who was already well known and well liked in the district. The precincts of South Knoxville, just south of the river within city limits, have been trending more and more Democratic in recent election cycles. The areas outside the city still voting quite Republican. And so a lot of it may come down to, just where there is more turnout, who gets people to come out. But it was already looking like a sort of, a close enough race to be interesting, just factoring in Fox and Matthew Park, throwing Smith now into the mix, especially because, Fox won a Republican primary there in March pretty decisively by close to 70-30 margin over Barry Neal. But Barry Neal is a well-known and well-liked neighborhood advocate in some of those city neighborhoods. And I had already been hearing talk from supporters of Barry Neal that they were not happy with Fox. And so you kind of already had that slightly, volatile political situation there. And then you throw this third party candidate in who knows how many votes he takes. But if the election was already potentially going to be close, and then you have somebody who comes in and takes especially potential Republican votes off the table, could definitely have an effect.
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned that Smith was going to go everywhere that Fox is going to go, and they were actually both at Thursday's Planning Commission meeting, and they both spoke on a South Knox County development that we'll be talking about later. But
absolutely,
it was interesting. They didn't, I did not see them engage one another, and they certainly they were actually on the same side. But it was interesting that the two candidates, or two of the three candidates, chose to go and speak out on a planning commission issue.
Yeah, Smith kind of doing what he said he was going to do.
Yeah.
And that race is interesting in the 9th District, and we will be talking about it in more detail in a few weeks when we write about it and all of the candidates there. But all of that was just an interesting wrinkle. Every election cycle, there's something you haven't seen before, and this was that for sure. All right, Scott, let's talk about the African American Equity Restoration Task Force. Remind us what it is, and then what did it do this week?
The task force was created 2020, and at the end of 2020. It was really pushed by Councilwoman Gwen McKenzie. It exists to its primary mission is to go out and get grant funding to go to programs that primarily serve African American community, and it is in large measure to kind of reverse the inequities that were exacerbated by urban renewal. And it's not these aren't reparations. They're not just giving money to individuals. What they're doing is trying to get grant money that benefits East Knoxville primarily, but the African American community, because East Knoxville was where urban renewal happened in the city. So the one example of that they have talked about is the Reconnecting Communities grant, which was the big $42.6 million transportation grant the city received earlier this year. They were very involved in the application process. The part of the reason the grant was awarded was to, and its purpose is to, increase the transportation connections between communities that were cut off from either by urban renewal or highway projects, or both, as is the case with East Knoxville. So, but they look at that as a win, and but what they did this week or last week was they're coming up to the end of the fiscal year. The fiscal year ends June 30th, and the city did support them with about $300,000 in funding to do kind of overhead stuff. If they needed to bring in experts or hire grant writers or whatever, they could use that pool of money. Well, they barely used any of it. They still had $250,000 left, or $150,000 left over. So they had about half of it. And so what they decided to do was they would just take that money instead of having to just go right back in the budget and all. They took that money and wanted to put it in the hands of organizations that they were intending to help. We've got the money, let's do it. So they came up with they put together a grant program with help from the city administration, and let organizations know that they could apply for the grants. These are community groups. They're either 501c3 organizations, nonprofits, or they're community organizations that are smaller, but they have a fiscal agent that is a 501c3. So, and many of the groups qualified. The grants, they ended up being anywhere between $5,000 and $25,000. And they were awarded 18 organizations. They do a lot of different things. The biggest recipient was the $25,000 grant went to the Unique Academy. That's an educational center in East Knoxville. New Directions Healthcare Solutions, which is a healthcare organization. They were very involved in the, I think you could say by any measure, the successful effort to prevent COVID from disproportionately affecting the African American community here. Many cities, the African American communities were really hard hit. What they did was they really got the word out. They got people vaccinated. They did a lot of work. They're getting a $20,000 grant, but there are plenty of other groups too that are getting these grants. The Women, which is a group that tries to raise equity for businesses. The Connect Ministries, East Tennessee Housing Development Corporation, the Closer Walk Reentry, the Bottom, Drums Up, Guns Down. So there's several organizations, in a variety of fields. One of the big things is they were wanting to make sure that the organizations still, tried to fulfill the mission of what they want to do. They want to promote home ownership, business ownership, education. So those were the organizations that got most of that money. And so, in some of them, it's going to be, some organizations, $5,000 is a huge amount. Other organizations, it may just help out a little bit, but it's going to go to all those organizations' programs. They already have it, and they had to, when they apply, they say this is what we're going to spend the money on. And but it was just kind of a way to go ahead and get some funding into some of these organizations' hands.
Yeah, and obviously this is a small amount of money, $150,000 total, and those grants from $5,000 to $20,000, not tremendous outlays, but it's interesting because it's something that the task force very much from the beginning has been focused on, mostly attracting outside funding, grants of various kinds. You mentioned that $42 million federal grant, but this was them acting as a direct granting body themselves,
right?
And as you say, not really by plan so much as by just happenstance, because we have this money and we could go ahead and spread it out through the community. What I have always found interesting about this task force is that I feel like it has critics, and it has from the beginning, on both the left and the right. And the criticisms from the left come from social justice advocates who are basically skeptical that it's really going to do anything much, that it's kind of a lot of window dressing. When that $42 million grant came through and the task force went ahead and voted to count that entire amount toward the $100 million that they're trying to attract and generate over the course of a decade, there were definitely critics from the left who said, you're building bike paths and greenways around the baseball stadium and connecting, the implication being that, how does this benefit the people who actually directly live in the community. A lot of skepticism there. Meanwhile, on the right, this has always been painted, including in some campaign materials, for example, during city council elections, as a quote-unquote reparations program. Mm-hmm. And reparations, of course, is a politically, culturally loaded word that refers to trying in one way or another to make good to the African American community on the centuries of oppression, discrimination, brutality, imprisonment, slavery that they have endured through American history right up until just about 60 years ago, the passage of the, officially we were a, legally racially segregated country until 1964, until just 60 years ago. Yeah. And a lot of the disparities that we continue to see between the African American population and the American population as a whole are absolutely just direct legacies of that. But there has always been this horror, essentially, on the right, going back to the end of the Civil War, when, of course, there were the sort of legendary promise of 40 acres and a mule to emancipated African Americans that never materialized. And there has just been tremendous resistance, especially in the South, among, the white, let's just call it what it is, white supremacist politicians who very quickly reasserted control of the South after the end of Reconstruction, to really ever doing anything, to ever recognizing any kind of historic harm or damage. And that has over time kind of calcified into just a knee-jerk anger at any suggestion that there should be anything done to recompense anybody for anything that happened. And they call it reparations, and they're against it. And, of course, that's why Mackenzie, from when she first started this, has always said, this is not reparations. That's not what we're doing. We're trying to attract new funding and new investment. We're recognizing historic disparities, and we know why they're there. And in this case, we're specifically talking about urban renewal. We're not even talking about slavery. We're talking about something much more recent than that, the bulldozing of African American communities in the mid-20th century in Knoxville.
Plenty of people here who were directly affected by that.
Absolutely. And their children and their grandchildren absolutely are still here. So, it's kind of, the task force, I feel like, has always been a little bit caught betwixt and between people on the left who want it to be something more like what we would think of as reparations, and people on the right who say, even just talking about this is offensive to us because it implies some sort of responsibility that we may have, and we don't want any part of it.
And it's one of the things, criticism from the left about the greenways going, and that grant is primarily for greenways. The counter argument to that is, there aren't many greenways in East Knoxville, and East Knoxville should get the same attention that other parts of the city, West Knoxville, South Knoxville, North Knoxville, have. And so it's all about, that's how they fit counting this grant in to their mission. So.
Well, and also greenways, I mean, I think there's a tendency sometime to think of greenways as just sort of like, fancy bike paths for yuppies or whatever. And sure, they can be that. But networked green, and so like the greenway at Lakeshore Park, it doesn't go anywhere. It's just a big circle. It's very pretty. But that's all it is. But a greenway network, which is what this is talking about, it's about connecting places, actually is part of transportation infrastructure. It provides another avenue for people to move between parts of the city on foot or on bicycles or whatever, especially people who may not have access to other forms of transportation. And so, you can definitely make a case that this isn't just about having outdoor recreation amenities. It's another transportation network that will serve that part of the city. But anyway, just interesting conversation around that. And what does the task force have a count of where they are at so far in terms of getting to that $100 million?
The $46 million $42 million grant is by far the largest grant they've received. They've got some smaller bits and pieces here and there, but they're getting close to halfway to their $100 million goal. 4 years in? So
but still a lot that they presumably want to do there.
And McKinsey is very insistent that the $100 million goal is not a ceiling. That it's, if they hit the $100 million goal, they're going to keep going and try to get more. So, but that's it's most grants are not the size of the Reconnecting Communities grant. It'll take a lot more for them to reach that goal.
Right. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about School Board District 3. The county's 3rd district is a little bit of a odd district. It's even a little hard to explain where it is. It's kind of west/northwest Knoxville, Knox County. It starts in the city, in some city neighborhoods sort of west of West Haven, and then extends out kind of along Middlebrook Pike through Cedar Bluff, and then all the way actually across Pellissippi Parkway to Lovell Road. So it's a kind of urban/suburban district. It we were just talking about the 9th district. The 3rd district also has been traditionally Republican, but in recent years has shown some signs of being a little more politically mixed. The most recent race that we have to look at here was the county commission race in that district 2 years ago, which was also very close. Republican Gina Oster did win, but by fewer than 100 votes. And so, it looks at least theoretically competitive from a partisan standpoint, even though it has been represented by Republicans. What's interesting about the school board race is that the district is currently represented by Daniel Watson. Watson identifies as an independent, and he was elected to the board 4 years ago before the board had switched back to being politically partisan. So he didn't declare a political party when he ran in 2020. He is not seeking re-election. He and his wife started a new preschool last year, which we wrote about, and he wants to devote more time to that, so he's not going to be on the school board. Watson has been part of what I would call sort of the progressive coalition on the board. The two independents, him and Jennifer Owen, on sort of politically divisive issues, more controversial issues, they more often vote with the two Democrats on the board than with the currently 5-member Republican majority on the board. So in the 3rd district race, we have a Republican, Angie Goddard, running against a Democrat, Patricia Fontenot Ridley, and there is no independent candidate running. So what that means is that the result of this race is going to affect the partisan makeup of the board one way or another. Either we will have now 6 Republicans instead of the current 5-member majority, which would give them a little bit more breathing room and cushion, especially when it comes to some of these more controversial, more political issues, or we'll have 3 Democrats. At least 3 Democrats, because the other independent, Jennifer Owen, is also running this time, and there's a Democrat in that race, so that could shift it too. But definitely with the 3rd district, we will see, we're going to get a partisan representative out of that district, which we currently don't have. The 2 candidates are interesting. Angie Gerdert is a parent who she had been involved with her children's PTA. Both of her children have now graduated. They graduated from Hardin Valley Academy, but she was an involved parent with the parent groups and so forth, kind of a normal background for a school board candidate, a traditional background for a school board candidate, except that her political activity, her broader political activity, really started with the pandemic. And she was part of the group of parents who started showing up relatively early on in the pandemic at school board meetings, protesting the whole range of public health mandates that were affecting public schools. Of course, the need to wear masks, but also tracking exposure of students to COVID and quarantining and all of those things that had a fairly significant impact on students in Knox County for a couple of years. And she was very much against all of those things being mandated, thought that masks should be optional. The school system should not be forcing people to quarantine because of exposure and so on and so forth. And because of her activity around the pandemic and then the health mandates, she was the founding chair of the local chapter of Moms for Liberty, the conservative activist group that started in Florida in 2021. And Angie Gertert was the first person to kind of incorporate or, bring that group here, and she was involved with them for a year or so. She was also involved in filing, not affiliated with Moms for Liberty, but filing a separate lawsuit against the mask mandate that was put in place by a federal judge during the second year of the pandemic. So, all of her activity really came around that. And then she says that she kind of drifted away from Moms for Liberty after the mask mandate went away and after, life returned to more or less post-pandemic normality, because she said that was the main reason she had been involved with the group. Interestingly, in the Republican primary in March, she had a Republican opponent, Robert Daspit. He was endorsed by the current leadership of the Moms for Liberty chapter here. She was not. So whatever falling out or whatever happened there, she is clearly not the Moms for Liberty candidate, even though her association with the group, I think, is probably leading a lot of people to call her that anyway. But she says, no, she's not. They don't even endorse me. And, she says that she does strongly favor parental involvement and control over their children's schooling. Definitely, she is running as a Republican. She's running with support from some of the other Republican members of the board. I think that it's fair to expect that if she's elected, she would probably tend to vote more with that side, because that's what we see happening with the partisan school board on controversial issues. A lot of what they vote on, they vote 9-0 or 8-1 or whatever, but on controversial issues, they are tending to break down along those partisan lines. And I think if Gertert is elected, you would expect her to be on the Republican side of that line, because that's the side she's running on. The Democratic candidate, Patricia Fontenot Ridley, is interesting because she is a retired teacher, and she thinks it's very important to have teacher voices on the board. We've gone from just 8 years ago, 6 of the 9 school board members were former teachers or former school employees, had direct experience of the district. And now we are down to 1. Jennifer Owen is the only former educator who's still on the board. And so Fontenot Ridley partly wants to bring a voice for the teachers, for the employees of the school system, and also to be able to talk knowledgeably about, they talk about a lot of things, state testing mandates and the impact that has on teachers. She thinks it's important to have some voices on the board who have direct experience of that, who can say, well, here's
how it really works.
Right, exactly. This might sound like a good idea, but actually this is like the way it works. And this is the impact that this thing is going to have on teachers and therefore on students. And that was one thing Fontenot Ridley said when I talked to her, was that, I think there's a tendency for especially people who are maybe skeptical of public education overall as an enterprise. They talk very dismissively about teachers and teacher unions. And the implication is basically they're only out for themselves. They're not there for the students. They're just there to get paid. Well, what teachers always say to that is, look, if I wanted to go into a profession where I was just there to get paid, there would have been a lot better options than this one. Because even though they did just increase the salary schedule for teachers in the district, it is still not a highly paid profession by the standards of most professions that you need to get a bachelor's degree and in a lot of cases a master's degree to work in. But also, she said that anything that affects teachers also affects students. Like, teachers are the ones who are the day-to-day interface with the students. They're the ones doing the work that everybody talks about is the central mission of public education. And so if you make teachers' jobs harder, if you demoralize teachers, if you bog them down with endless paperwork, the harder you make it for them to do their core job in the classroom, the harder it's going to be for them to serve students. And so her argument is that looking out for teachers is also like inherently looking out for students. She is also, however, a parent herself. Her own son, who's now in his 30s, but he went through Knox County Schools. And so she has experience of the district both as a teacher and a parent. And, she initially pulled a petition to run as an independent, but then pulled the petition to run as a Democrat. I asked her about that, and she said that she's always identified herself as a Democrat. She, more or less shares the values and principles of the party in general when it comes to voting. And also she realized that her 30 years as a phys ed teacher in Knox County Schools did not really teach her a whole lot about running a political campaign, and that running as an independent, she would really kind of be out there on her own, whereas running as a Democrat, she has support from the Democratic Party. She has access to lots of resources that make that easier. So they're on the ballot for August 1st. If you live in the 3rd District, you get to vote in that election. And whichever way that vote goes, we'll have some incremental. It's only 1 out of 9 seats, but still obviously matters to the makeup of the school board. And that'll be interesting. Okay, Scott, a couple of somewhat controversial developments in South Knox County came through the Planning Commission this week. And as you mentioned earlier, a couple of political candidates showed up to weigh in along with community members. So what happened there?
Yeah, it was very interesting. It's 2 developments in South Knox County. They're very similar. One is called Thunder Mountain. It's part of a much larger development. They went through a contentious rezoning a couple of years ago for another big parcel down there. But Thunder Mountain is about 103. This parcel about 103 acres. Most of it is on the side of a mountain and basically undevelopable. There is a flat area, and it's right off Chapman Highway, east of Chapman Highway. There's Badgett Field there. A lot of people might think that is a landmark as you're getting close to Seymour. That is it's just on the other side of it, and in fact it encircles it, as a matter of fact. But anyway, the developer wanted to come in, Thunder Mountain Properties, and build a subdivision there. 3 units an acre is what they wanted. Planning Commission staff, the planning staff, recommended just 2. But what they do, and this is part of the whole ridgetop and hillside protection program, which is mandatory in the city, advisory in the county. But what they do is they take, you're allowed up to 2 or 3 units per acre, but you can build them all on a smaller area that's not on the hillside to prevent erosion and clear cutting and that sort of thing. So that's what they intend to do. Well, a lot of people in the area did not take kindly to that. They don't, it's in the planned growth area, but it's a very rural area. And, they said that clustering houses like that, even though, the entire parcel, it isn't, the density is not real intense, but in that one area, it certainly is. And so instead of having, houses with, half acre, quarter acre lots or 1 acre lots or larger, you're going to have a lot of houses crammed together, and it's going to, look different. It's going to be a lot of traffic in one place and all that stuff. They really didn't like that. And we were talking about, I was talking about Stacy Bride Smith showing up. He came to speak of that. He spoke about the environmental concerns that he had. He was concerned that they would still disturb the mountainside behind them, behind these houses, and brought that up. But the planning commissioners, they're basically saying, this is what the hillside protection, directive does. This is the way to preserve the hillside by clustering. It's clustering, and so they, in fact, as I said, the staff had recommended 2 dwelling units an acre. They upped it to 3, which is what the developer asked for, and so now there will be, roughly 300 houses that will go in the flat portion of that property, at the foot of the mountain there, and then this other piece of property is over on Tipton Station Road, kind of near Martin Mill Pike, and it's not nearly as big. It's about, what it is the actual parcel is pretty large. It's about 155 acres. But they're not going to develop 155 acres. They're going to develop 85 acres. 70 acres, the Stock Creek flows across the property. 70 acres south of Stock Creek. Again, steep hillsides, difficult to develop. They're not going to develop it. They're only going to develop the front part, the 85 acres. But they wanted a greater density. They wanted, initially asked for 6 dwellings an acre. They wound up getting 4, but that brought out a lot of opposition. Smith again was concerned because a lot of this property has old growth hardwood trees. Again, his concern was about the environmental damage, runoff into Stock Creek, that sort of thing. And his Republican opponent, Andy Fox, showed up. And basically Fox was saying, there are a lot of people in South Knox County who don't think you listen to them, care about their opinions on things, and just run roughshod over them. And you see that there are other instances where people who are politically corrected, you accommodate them, and so you need to do that with them. And there were other people from the community who did come and speak as well. Most of it had to do with density. There was some traffic issues that they had. They were okay with a couple of maybe 2 dwelling units an acre for this. And Ben Mullins, who's the attorney for the developer, it's the Schubert family, longtime Knoxville builders, and they Ben Mullins said, well, if you give us 4 units an acre, we will be able to that'll be enough income eventually for us to make road improvements that will be necessary. There's an intersection nearby on Tipton Station that does need reworking, and so we can fix that intersection, but we have to have the income from 4 dwelling units an acre. 2 dwelling units an acre probably just won't cut it. And Jim Snowden, the engineering and public works director for the county, confirmed that was the case. A couple of years from now, that they were planning to address that intersection, and that had a lot of sway with the planning commissioners. Although the vote was a little narrower. The Thunder Mountain was approved 10-1. This was an 8-3 vote. A couple of the commissioners said the difference for the couple of commissioners who voted no on this one said, the big difference is Chapman Highway is right. Thunder Mountain's right by Chapman Highway, and it's more logical for that to have denser development. the one on Tipton Station is kind of tucked away. No other subdivision in its immediate area is as dense as four dwelling units an acre. So that was kind of their argument there. But really, the Planning Commission has started really paying attention to density, and they are. I mean, they're like the rest of us when that are, and probably even more so because it's part of what they do as a volunteer board. But they know that there's a housing shortage here. Things need to be, we need the housing, and that it makes sense. And as Planning Commissioner Eddie Smith said, we can increase density. We can't increase the amount of land we have. So they're very, and he actually gave a quite impassioned speech on the need for housing and the need for density, and so that was the prevailing attitude of the commission, as the Planning Commission as a whole. So the one thing is, and this point was made as well, the rezoning was to planned development. That's the zone, and basically what that means, just like it sounds, they've got to have a development plan. It has to come back to the county commission. So that's where all these details are going to be.
Well, it comes back to Planning Commission, right?
That's
not County Commission.
Oh, Planning Commission, yes.
County Commission will have to approve the rezonings.
Well, I was going to get to that, but so they will have to submit a development plan. But before that happens, County Commission will have to vote on the rezoning, and things can change. I mean, the Thunder Mountain, the other large parcel that Thunder Mountain did in the same area, the Dry Hollow area down there in South Knox County, when it got to County Commission, they reduced the density. So, I mean, it can happen again, and generally speaking, the Planning Commission is a little more technical. County Commission is a little more political, and so things can change between now and the time they actually start building houses.
Sure. Well, and so you mentioned the Thunder Mountain property being in the planned growth area. Is the Tipton Station Road property also in planned growth?
It is also in the planned growth area.
So, I mean, I think that this comes back to, of course, we've talked a lot about the county's planning, and they just went through a whole big update of updating their growth plan and growth map. And those areas that are designated for planned growth, they are designated for planned growth. Yes. And people who live around those areas, I think can have a lot of concerns about that. But, it's like it is what it says in the actual adopted plans of the county. Now, being in a planned growth area does not guarantee you any set level of density, but it allows higher levels of density than you find if it's in the rural areas. And as you say, with so much focus on housing shortage and spiraling housing costs, I think the people who signed off on all of those plans that established where the planned growth areas are probably, a lot of them on Planning Commission and probably on County Commission too, are going to be looking at those and saying, okay, this is why this is what we designated this area for, is growth, and is growth up to, I think you can go up to 5 units an acre in planned growth areas.
You can go bigger than that. Mm-hmm. There was another matter that came before the Planning Commission where it was up to 12,
right?
In a different part of the county. But yeah, and one of the things that makes that seems counterintuitive to a lot of people, just regular citizens who live out in these areas, is the Thunder Mountain area, Dry Hollow, it's rural. I mean, it's not in the rural area; it's in the planned growth area, but it's rural. I mean, there are a lot of farms down there still. Houses are far apart. It's so in their mind, they live in the country, and they don't live in the city where you do have higher densities like that, and so they tend to fight it.
Yep. Regardless of what the growth map says. Okay. Final thing to hit on this week before we look ahead to next week. Knox County Schools on Thursday received from the State Department of Education their district-wide reading scores on the state-administered tests that students took this spring. And, of course, the ones that we're looking at in particular are 3rd and 4th grade, because there's been so much talk about the importance of third graders being able to, hit the proficiency mark on reading and reading comprehension. And we have these somewhat controversial state laws now that for third graders who don't meet that mark, they're subject to various kinds of mandatory intervention, including summer learning camps, which is the fun new way to talk about summer school. Makes it sound a little more festive. It's practically Bonnaroo, a summer learning camp. And also intensive tutoring in 4th grade. And then 4th graders who didn't hit those marks in 3rd grade have to show what the state has defined as adequate growth on their 4th grade test in order to qualify for promotion to 5th grade. And if they don't, then they are subject to, they have to agree to still more tutoring in 5th grade. So the good news for the school system was that their system-wide scores went up from the previous year. They had 43.5% of third graders hit that proficiency mark, which is up just about a 0.5%. Last year it was at 42.9%, but that 42.9% last year was already the highest number the county had ever hit. So the 43.5% shows continued growth, and again, it's the highest number that the county has hit. And among 4th graders hitting that mark, it was actually 50.1%. So they got over the more than half mark of 4th graders scored proficient or above on that test. Of course, that still leaves, in the case of 3rd graders, a majority of 3rd graders still scored below and would be theoretically subject to those remediations, except that a lot of students are exempt. So students who have any kind of disability that affects their reading and reading comprehension, and students who are ELL, English language learners, that is people who do not speak English as their first language and who are still learning English, they are also exempt from it. So countywide, actually, close to 73% of third graders either were proficient or were exempt, and so 27-ish% are subject to those other mandates. About 200, and what that translates into is about 250 third graders, rising 4th graders, students who are going to be in 4th grade next year, are currently enrolled in one of those summer learning camps and hopefully having a lot of fun. Enjoy yourselves, kids. But the county marks were also above the state averages, which was true last year too. And but obviously something the county feels good about by a couple of points in both cases. The state average for third graders was 40.9%, so the county was a couple of points above that, 2.5 to be precise. And the state average for fourth graders was like 46.4%. So the Knox County fourth graders were well above that. So they feel good about it. Governor Bill Lee came out and also kind of cited the statewide numbers. Now, the statewide third grade number really barely moved. It was kind of flat from the previous year, but that fourth grade number did go up, which Lee took as a sign that this whole third grade reading retention law is working. It is putting more focus on students who need help. It is providing resources to those students, and that the state is seeing some benefit from it. Of course, there's still a lot of controversy around that law and around the stress that it creates for third graders, especially, who don't find out until the very end of the school year whether they scored proficient or not, and then are kind of slapped with this that they and their parents have to scramble to figure out, are they going to have to go to summer school? What are they going to have to do for fourth grade? So there is still some pushback against that law in terms of it. Do we need to put our 8, 9, and 10-year-olds under quite so much stress and pressure, and does that really help them in the long term? Obviously, we're still very early in seeing the impacts of all of this. But
now, Jesse?
Yeah.
Life is stressful, so they might as well learn it in third grade.
That's right. If you're gonna get called a failure by your boss, you better start early.
I kid.
So, I think that conversation about that law will go on, but these results give both the state and the county at least some grounds to say, hey, we are putting a lot of focus and attention on this, and we are seeing some impact on the numbers. So we'll see, but obviously, it's better news for local officials to be up from the previous year than to be down, and it's better news to be above the state average than to be below it.
That is correct, and of course, these things, a lot of times will run in cycles, and so we'll see if this is a trend or an anomaly, in the coming years. So.
Or if we get another pandemic or some event that disrupts everything, who knows? All right, well, let's go ahead and look ahead to the coming week. We do have a couple things going on. County Commission is meeting on Monday, and just as a reminder, if you are a regular attendee of County Commission meetings, or even an irregular one, there are some changes to their entire schedule that you need to know about. We talked about this last month when they adopted them, but this is the first month that it's actually taking effect. So this Monday, in the past, the county would have had their the commission would have had their agenda work session on the third Monday of the month, where they review the entire agenda that they're going to be voting on at their regular meeting on the fourth Monday. That has shifted a little bit. What they're doing is a less formal agenda review, and that will be at 3 p.m. instead of at 5 p.m. So if you want to, and I believe the idea is that it's not going to be so much a formal going through like every item on the agenda and asking if anyone has any questions about it, as allowing commissioners to raise questions or offer comments or information on particular items that they want to. So we'll see how all that works. And then the zoning meeting, which has been part of that meeting the fourth Monday of the month, is now getting its own day and time slot. That is moving to the third Monday, and that meeting will happen at 5 o'clock in the main assembly room of the City County building at the time and place that the old agenda work session would have happened. So if you are concerned with anything on this month's zoning agenda for County Commission, you need to be there this Monday rather than the next Monday.
And that's one thing that's mandatory for people to have the applicants for rezoning. It's mandatory for them to show up.
That's right. If you are applying for a rezoning, you have to be there. County Commission will not approve a rezoning unless the applicant is there. And people who fail to show up, I think they get 1 month of it being automatically deferred. They get sort of a chance to come back. But I have seen rezonings die just because the applicant doesn't show up a couple of months in a row and it gets denied. So absolutely, if you are somebody trying to get property rezoned, you need to be at that meeting. And that meeting, again, is now the third Monday of the month at 5 p.m. So that's happening Monday. Also happening Monday is a school board candidate forum organized by the League of Women Voters. They have invited all of the candidates in the 3 competitive school board races this year, which is, I have to say them off the top of my head, the 3rd district, the 5th district, right? I should have written this down before I came here. The 3rd, 5th, and I'm sorry.
You're the school guy, man.
The 2nd district. Sorry.
I was about to say, I think the 2nd district.
It's a Friday. Yeah. I'm blanking out. The 2nd, 3rd, and 5th districts. Those are the ones with competitive school board races.
You know what's really embarrassing about that is that's the district that you and I live in.
The 2nd district. That's true.
I couldn't think of it either. I'm not saying that you should be embarrassed. I'm just saying,
it's just a lot of elections to keep track of, folks.
Oh, it is. 2nd,
3rd, and 5th districts, those candidates have all been invited. We don't know yet exactly which ones are going to show up to a candidate forum, which will be at Lenincini Church there at the corner of Brooks Avenue and Dandridge Avenue in East Knoxville. And I'm going to be moderating that. So hopefully sometime before then, I will be able to lodge in my head, which districts are actually going to be there. So that'll run from 6:30 to 8. Anybody interested in those races should come out. And then, Scott, on this coming Thursday, City Council is having its own work session.
Yeah, they're having a work session. They haven't announced the exact time. Usually it's about 5 on work sessions. Could be 6. The regular meetings are at 6 o'clock. So, but anyway, it'll be at the main assembly room, City County building. What they're going to do is talk about. They're going to talk about development incentives. We talk about them all the time. The payment in lieu of tax or pilots, and tax increment financing, TIFs. Those are. They'll be talking about that. They'll also probably talk about the new incentives that the Kincannon administration is putting together for the owners of existing older apartment buildings, to kind of an incentive that would encourage them to make upgrades without raising rents. And so exactly how that's going to work is something I'm sure they'll talk about. And I know that they'll also talk about incentives for properties along the major corridors. Several of the council members, Charlie Thomas and Andrew Roberto, prominently among them, but others as well, really want to see mixed-use development go in on some of the corridors like Chapman Highway or Clinton Highway and all. And those property owners can go ahead and get pilots and TIFs now. I mean, if they so choose, but then they have to actually plan to develop that type of development there, and just very few have. And there are a lot of either empty or underutilized shopping centers along those. There's one in North Knoxville that is the concourse is in. I think it's Northgate. Is that?
Yep, Northgate.
The concourse is closing. Just a couple of businesses left in there. They've got the East Tennessee Design Center to try to hold these meetings to try to talk about what the future would be for it. Now the city does have all those things. TIFs and pilots are basically, it's gap financing. It's so that the banks are comfortable enough with the deal to loan the money to the developer that they need to build it. One of the things that they've done is they've scraped together $950,000, almost $1 million, of unused American Rescue Plan Act funds from various programs. They've already spent all that. They've got the things that they were using that money for in place, this is leftover money. We've got to spend it by the end of the year. And one of the things that they talked about doing is using that for land acquisition. And they talked about using it for land acquisition along corridors. Now, that sounds like a lot, but the property along corridors is the most expensive property in the city.
Right, so the prime commercial.
Yeah,
property.
I mean, when you're talking about $1 million, the CVS pharmacy on Broadway recently, CVS closed the pharmacy there, and they sold it, and it's going to be redeveloped. But
it's already it looks like it's about ready to open. It's
going
to be a new auto parts place.
Yeah, but it's that's a small. When you're talking about commercial property, it's kind of a small lot. It was sold for $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
So $1 million by itself doesn't go very far, but that $1 million can possibly be part of the gap financing if they can find property that either the property owner wants to do something with, or they could. KCDC is usually involved in these projects too. KCDC could possibly buy something and with that money, and the city could buy it directly, and then KCDC could put out a request for proposals and see what happens. But all of these incentives for development are going to be up for discussion on Thursday.
All right. Well, we will be back here next week to talk about those things and anything else that happens in the interim. Thanks, as always, to Lord Seth Barber for his production work here at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright. And stay cool, everybody.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.